open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes in importance of
What is that process that a developer, or let's say,
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of In the Clouds. I'm your host, Stu Miniman, and we have a special time and special place for today. Yes, we are actually in person in a physical studio, not doing it remote. So I'm really pleased. I'm here in Raleigh, North Carolina, in the shadow of the mothership of Red Hat. Joining me is Chris Morgan, Senior Director of the Customer and Field Engagement Group at Red Hat. Chris, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to see you in person and great to be here.
Yeah, no, hey, Stu, I'm excited too, because, well, like you said, it's the first time this has been used, and to be able to do these things live now is pretty amazing. So thanks for having me and being kind of the flagship.
Well, so, when I took this show over from Chris Short, I gave him a nice shout out there. You and Chris are the ones that basically started OpenShift TV. So why don't you just give our audience, if you would, a little bit, your background. We don't have all time for the, full history of your journey, but we're going to talk about cloud stuff a lot. But
So, we were, I was super lucky in that, my background, I started back at IBM many years ago as a teenager. And
who's that company?
Some international business machines is what I reckon they call it completely. And, and so for me, it was kind of coming back after the acquisition, but I've had the good fortune to, I was a contributor to open source when I was in college. That's a fun story, maybe for off the stream. And so to come back to Red Hat, then I started working on our management products, and then, this OpenShift thing came up, and I'm super lucky that I was one of the original 4 or 5 business unit folks, along with Joe Fernandez and Grant Shipley, who's just returned, to really be involved. And, and Ashesh Badani was leading that group, and we worked with Matt Hicks. He was actually the lead engineer on it. So, it's been kind of a really fun journey to see that. And my first job on the team was helping grow the partner ecosystem. And so I'm hoping we can talk more about that today.
Yeah, we're absolutely cloud ecosystem bit, but OpenShift TV, things shut down a little bit. It's not like Red Hat didn't do videos, but, you and Chris put your heads together and were hey.
It was actually the whole team. Andrew Sullivan on the team was the one that he mentioned. He's like, well, why don't we do something on Twitch? And I was like, what is a Twitch? I knew what a Twitch was, but so I did what any adult would do at my age, and I spoke to my kids, and they explained it all to me. And then we, came back, and the guys were really all into it because it was such an uncertain time. We wanted a way to show that we were still humans, just like the people out there, even in isolation. And we wanted to kind of create a way for the users in particular, whether, they were community users or existing customers, but people that were interested in our technologies to really connect with us and do some things. And, it's just kind of great to see it grow up to have a studio, right? Heck, the fact that Red Hat even has a studio. First time I went to Westford, Massachusetts and met Paul and some of the team, I think they had just moved from like a meat shop up there or something. It's really great to see how this continues evolving.
Yeah, we are working on studios now. Matt's CEO, he likes doing video. He tells everyone at Red Hat, how to get the right camera and all these things. So we're working on studios in Boston. Some of the team's actually working on that, as we speak. But, so excited to be here in an actual studio after, I used to spend a lot of time in studios and in front of the bright lights and everything like that. But let's, we have a little bit of background and the intro, but, this is in the cloud. So, right, you have lived, you've got scars and the history of what comes on. So, we look today at this like cloud native ecosystem.
Right.
We've been going through the Cambrian explosion of all the companies that are there, and every subsection, there's all these startups, all the big players are heavy there. And Kubernetes is everywhere.
Right.
It wasn't a given that this would be big. We've seen plenty of technologies where the hype gets big and you sit back a couple of years later and we're like, wow, how much, I made that, promise of $1 billion investment. And all of a sudden, like 2 years later, they're like, where's that company? Oh, they they fired half those people and, reorged and everything like that. So bring us in a little bit, we're talking cloud ecosystem.
Sure. It has been a journey. So, I'll maybe talk about a few things. Like you said, at the time, I would say, and you remember this because I think you actually interviewed some folks from there, but kind of Heroku maybe was the most well-known with regards to managing that user experience and making it simple for developers. And we started OpenShift as a means to show developers how they could consume the Red Hat stack easily. Now, admittedly, where did we start from? An acquisition like everyone else. And I can say that we used absolutely none of that code, as you learned this week in some of our breakouts, but it did at least plant the seeds and the ideas. And from that, we grew into what is now OpenShift. But in the first few iterations, an interesting thing, I always tell people, while, Docker made containers sexy, RHEL had been using them for a few years, right? Because they're fundamentally a Linux process. And so, what the team did, actually led by Matt Hicks, he did the coding for it. We knew we had to get some economies of scale. And so we did this first version of OpenShift that was based on RHEL containers and securing those as best that we could. And then we had a pluggable system we called a cartridge. Believe it or not, for the kids out there, if you've ever used a Nintendo or your parents still have theirs, you used to use a cartridge for everything, and even Atari back before that. So we kind of played off of that, and that's how the original ISV ecosystem was started. As you can imagine, the problem with that is, well, that was just a Red Hat standard. While it's an upstream project, it's still just us. And so it was exciting when what I would say Docker's contribution to what is now this Kubernetes ecosystem that we took advantage of was they made, plugging things into the system and made the containers just easier to work with and deal with. And, it has been a journey on that. And starting from that idea of, we've been a Linux company and we'll likely always be a Linux company. Our containers are Linux are containers, as the t-shirts show. It's great to, see where we can take that further, right? I think you and I were even speaking earlier today. I've always looked at OpenShift, and the way I even explained it to partners is think of it as nothing more than a better way, more easier way for you to use RHEL. Apologies to RHEL purists out there, but one of the first things a newbie to RHEL does is set enforce 0 to disable SE Linux. But you get the advantages of that security with OpenShift without having to do that.
All right. So it's funny. I'm thinking about like the cartridge analogy, and I think back to, I played on the game systems that had cartridges. Right. And one of the problems was like, I'll date myself, you got the Atari system. Oh, the new Atari system comes out. Oh my gosh, none of those cartridges work with the old ones. Right. Or, it's Nintendo versus Sega versus something else. None of those work. Right. Across platform. Containers in Kubernetes, first of all, it opened up a broad platform for a lot of applications, and it changed the dynamic when it came to the ISV standpoint. Because if I look at the ecosystem now, one of the things we talk about, operators, which the CoreOS people started, right. It's now open source. If I build an operator, you talked about making RHEL easy, but it's Kubernetes there. So not just works on OpenShift, you change your Tanzu, XKS, any of those other things there, I can take there. So maybe talk to that shift from the ecosystem, because Red Hat has played, an important role, not to get everybody on Red Hat, but to grow that kusystem.
Yeah. So I think what happened, we'll start, you said a lot of things in there, so I'll kind of pick them apart a little bit if I may. The Kubernetes piece, the reason for me personally, and everyone at Red Hat will have their opinion on it, was, Red Hat excels at taking communities that maybe already exist and making them even better, right? If you look at, we didn't invent Linux. You could argue we made it pretty good, right? To say the least. We didn't invent Kubernetes. That was the good folks at Google, and but they asked us to join them, and we did, right? And our contributions as a company, and there's been so many people that have contributed to it. It was that piece was the big change, right? Is instead of going to the ecosystem and saying, hey, this is a Red Hat thing, we were able to truly say it was a community thing. And while we were, obviously one of the most major contributors, it wasn't just us. and then hoping to get people along. And so that really impacted all the different ecosystems. We talked about ISVs, right? Your cartridges now. I thought you were going to talk about blowing into the cartridge when it wouldn't load. But we essentially we're now able to say, well, hey, this is a community, and we're using this standard that you're now used to with regards to the container runtime, right? Because the original runtime was even the open source Docker version in Kubernetes, and that caused then the SIs, right? The solutions integrators, and then some of the regional SIs. And then, we still had partners even in those cartridge days, but it was just a little tougher, and I do have to, point out the more successful partners we've had, they have been long-term with us, and they've seen that journey, and I think they've appreciated it more, and they knew we didn't switch directions that quickly. I think, Joe Dickman at Missouri, right? And so Joe, this is for you. He always likes to say he was the first OpenShift partner, and he was, right? He took a risk, and now it's paying some dividends for him because he and his company are doing quite well with even the new stuff. So
no, it was great. Actually, I saw Joe down in New York City. He was there with us at the Amazon show, which, you talk about things different. Remember early days, Kubernetes. Well, it's Google's Hail Mary to make sure that multi-cloud actually might become a thing. Or,
right.
Of course, you need to be able to run multiple places because otherwise we will all live in Amazon. Now, Amazon, a lot of us partner with Amazon. They're part of it. So let's talk about how things have changed. I think back, one of the things I've spent, some time is I talked to some of those early customers and those early partners. There was a lot of, chewing glass and, bleeding edge things of the immaturity of the ecosystem. Boy, a lot has changed in the last, we know how fast things are changing, but things have changed a lot. So maybe give us, if you could, a compare contrast of, hey, if I looked at this space 2 or 3 years ago, what's it mean for a partner? What's it mean for a customer?
So I think that's actually a great question. It actually has evolved the same way as the technology itself. I think 2 or 3 years ago, we still had to do a lot of explaining to people what even a container is, right? It wasn't as universal as at least we at Red Hat would like to have believed it was. Now I think that's a little better. And so I think starting with that was a big challenge back then, that if you would have looked at it. And then there was still, a lot of echoes, I'll call it, from, the cloud foundries and even Heroku, and then, Mesos, right, was still trying to make a play, probably closer to 3 or 4 years ago on some of this stuff. And then, but we were doing Kubernetes, right? And we'd been doing it for quite some time by then. And so it was really, that was the inflection point. We no longer have to convince people Kubernetes. It won, right? Like Kubernetes is a project that is a de facto way to manage containers at scale, right? There's its own ecosystem built around it. If any of you have ever seen the Cloud Native Compute Foundation poster with all the projects now that are built off of it, it's awesome to see, right? So I think now the challenge, particularly for the ecosystem and even for us at Red Hat, is, well, now where do we place our bets, right? And when I think about the ecosystem, I look for, if I'm thinking of ISVs, what are those technologies that will complement, helping secure that platform, helping make it more stable, more manageable, all the pieces around it, right? We don't really look on the partner side, help us make, core Kubernetes better, right? I think our track record speaks for itself there. But when we can find those partners that really can enhance the value of it, and it's mutually beneficial in that way because maybe there's customer demand for it, it's great. And then on the services side, what's really changed is the fact that they are no longer having to make as many choices either. Now they do have to, if you consider EKS a distro, right? They do have to decide which distros they want to bet on, but that's also, going back to your cartridge analogy, to me, one of the biggest benefits of OpenShift is we're consistent. Actually, that's been always one of the biggest benefits of Red Hat, is we are literally everywhere, and we treat all the hyperscalers as first-class citizens, and we can give you, as you consume our technologies, a very consistent experience. So I don't have to worry, is this an Atari 2600 cartridge or a Nintendo cartridge? It's just OpenShift.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you look at the adoption trend of technology. You get a certain hype, and then there's that, oh, well, maybe it's matured, maybe it's gotten boring. It's good when technologies still get boring. We look at this space. I had Mike Barrett on the program when we had the last release and talked about like, oh, well, we went from 4 releases to 3 releases a year. Things have slowed down, right? And Mike's like, oh my God, have you seen our roadmap? Have you seen the hundreds of things we're working on? Yeah. We're having debates inside. We spend 90 minutes explaining what comes in a new release of OpenShift, and we can't even get everything in that long a period because hey, can we do like the 6-hour marathon of it? Right. And nobody's ever going to watch it. So
that is a great shameless plug though for OpenShift TV, right? It was always ironic to me going back to my time here that I'm like, why we're open source? Why are we hiding our roadmap? We should just do it for the world at any time, right? And so that's actually been great to see. But like you said, we have a hard time. We're both involved with that.
It's luckily, I heard, where are we when it comes to security of OpenShift?
Security of OpenShift. So, yeah, I can tell you right now, obviously, we have the StackRox acquisition, ACS now, and that is matured enough where it's more of a complete part, if you will, of OpenShift. It's been a journey, as you can think before. But even before ACS, I harken back to my SE Linux joke, right? Folks say the operating system doesn't matter. Doesn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, we were securing things all the way down at the kernel level for years, right? Dan Walsh, was one of the primary engineers that created that thing and was a Red Hatter, and then worked very closely with the NSA and other, agencies that are 3 letters that care a little bit about security, to say the least. And so for us, what ACS even became was, where can we extend those concepts, not only within Kubernetes, but even a little bit outside of Kubernetes, and bring in other pieces to the security ecosystem as well.
You're right. It only matters, if the application, the data, the business processes running on those things matter. If those things can all go away, you might have some cheaper alternatives. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so security, it's interesting you say that. That was one of the first areas that we looked at for the ecosystem, was we really wanted to make sure we knew what we have. I mean, now I had one customer tell me that they consider the new SE Linux or security context, which was a contribution that we originally made that used to be only in OpenShift, but commitment open source, we've made it available. It's all the way upstream in Kube itself. And so, but what's next, right? So to Mike's point, the things in the roadmap really are about enabling all these things on top of Kubernetes and around Kubernetes. And we spend a lot of time there. And I know I work closely with, our partner team. We have an entire partner team run by Stephanie Chiras. She was one of the first guests on this show. I'm so thankful to her from back in the day when we were trying to get OpenShift TV started. And so she runs the whole ecosystem now across everything. And so it's been really great to be able to have these offerings for partners that maybe it's stuff we don't have that we should have. They get to innovate. I think the sign of a good platform to me is when people start using it in ways that we never imagined. And I think we are just now scratching the surface of that.
All right. So Chris, you talked a little bit about your history. You talked about the partner piece. Maybe bring it to today. So, you the reason we're actually sitting here is for the first time in a couple of years, you brought your whole org in, which, disclaimer, I report to Chris. So, I know we were all, first of all, thrilled to be like, oh, wait, I'm not hearing you through your super nice microphone or, your mediocre lighting in home. We're actually here in 3D, getting meals together, having a beverage together, and we spent some time working everything. But explain what we were talking about, where your organization fits in that journey we are going on from the ecosystem standpoint.
So the great thing, first of all, I agree with you, man. It was so nice to party like it was 2019 again. To actually be able to see people, and we got a lot of work done as well, I think. But when I think about what our role in the ecosystem is, it's to continue to be that push, right? We don't sit in the organization as part of the CTO's office, right? That's really forward looking and research, but we do keep an eye, right? You know, everybody knows Burr Sutter, and, you know, Burr and I try to chat at least a couple times a month, and I pick his brain as to some things that are happening as well. And we want to kind of bridge the gap between that and things that I would argue, and it's a product of success, we'd consider institutional knowledge now. You know, I don't have to explain to most techies and admins what a pod is anymore, right? And what any of these basics are. And so now where we want to fit is, what can we do to enable the partner ecosystem, working through the other tools. I mentioned Stephanie Cheers' organization, because she's got an army of people to help with some of this, but we always want to try to help be the canonical source on our team, to give them the information, right? We sit with product management and we sit with engineering, and we like to take those things and, you know, make them more consumable. You had Mike Barrett on, and as you're well aware, I think Mike, I feel like I'm being prone to hyperbole here, but I feel like sometimes there's 300 product managers, right? And so bringing all of that together and understanding and prioritizing, that's really our job, right? Can we make it consumable to the masses, particularly the technical masses? Going back to, again, the history of OpenShift TV is we wanted to give a voice, potentially, because it is a live stream, not a recorded webinar, to folks to really engage with some experts. And so as far as today, what we're really driving the ecosystem, I feel like, is, hey, we're here. We've done this now for a really long time. Tell us what you have. Like, what is your value? What do you do for your business? And how are you making your business successful? Let us, instead of, hey, do something with us and let's just do it together, let's work and help make us both more successful. Like, it's an actual partnership. I mean, I'll be fully transparent. There were always times that it would feel like one partner was a customer and the other the vendor, not an actual partnership. And I think now what's happening is they're true partnerships going forward.
All right, well, Chris, I think that's a great place to leave it. We've got lots of the OpenShift TV, Andrew Sullivan, Sully, Ask an OpenShift Admin. I'm on your team doing some of the thought leadership executive interviews here within the cloud. So I'll give you the final word here.
Yes, for me, success will be defined. So Matt Hicks actually asked me this question randomly. I think we were in Orlando at a tech exchange talking about training our internal essays. And he just, he asked me, he said, what does success look like to you? And even the Shesh has asked me the same thing, Shesh Badani. And I give them both the same answer. It's when we actually don't have to talk about OpenShift. Just like, honestly, we like to talk about Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but people just presume it's there, right? And it's there and it's making it work. And so when we think about the partner ecosystem and growing it and for mutual customers, we want to be everywhere. I mean, we're in the space station. I mean, come on, like, how many companies have their software in, the International Space Station?
Oh,
so that's cool.
I love that. If you check out the In the Clouds playlist, you will find that. Chris, thank you so much. It's awesome to be here with you in person, to see everyone. We thank you, of course, for joining. Regularly scheduled programming every 2 weeks, 11 a.m. on Thursday. I'm Stu Miniman. As always, thank you for joining us on your journey in the clouds.